Welcome aboard, everyone. Today's program is called Talk of a Lifetime, Jewish Perspectives on Death and Afterlife. And today we have a panel with myself, Rabbi Avrohom Rapoport, AKA Rabbi Raps. We have my friend Jason Goldstein, the director of the local Jewish funeral home. Jason Goldstein Funeral Home and Monuments is here with us, as well as Yael Davidowitz, who's a member of the South Jersey Chevra Kadisha, which is a special group of people that help prepare those who pass away for their burial and their journey to the next world. And she's also the director of outreach at a Project Last Kindness. And I'll just take a moment and let them both introduce themselves quickly. Jason, maybe say hello.
Hello, everybody on Zoom and Instagram. I'm Jason Goldstein. I'm president and manager of J.S. Goldstein Funeral Home in Mays Landing, New Jersey. I have been a funeral director for 20 years, and I am a fourth generation funeral director. And I enjoy being a part of our wonderful community, volunteering with my family, Jessica, and my two boys, Sam and Luke, and just always being here whenever anyone needs us to give a helping hand.
Thank you, Jason. And you and I, fortunately and unfortunately, have worked together many, many times. Unfortunately, because it's for the funerals, but fortunately, because you are a true mensch and the way you interact with families, bringing them comfort and really helping guide them through a very, very difficult time. So it's an honor to know you, and it's an honor to have you here speaking to our wonderful audience. Yael Davidowitz, say hello to us. Introduce yourself, please.
Hey, hi, folks across the multiple platforms. It's good to be here this evening. Thank you, Jason and Rabbi Rapoport, for giving me a platform to share some ideas. So I'm a nurse by training, a nurse practitioner actually, but I'm involved as a volunteer for the South Jersey, sounds kind of fancy, but Sacred Burial Society, Chevra Kadisha. Like in many small areas, we're a group of all volunteers. I'll get a little bit into what we do, but basically we help prepare physically and somewhat spiritually the deceased as they transition from this world on. I'll also give a little plug for a program that I got involved in recently. It's called Last Kindness. It's a national effort to help provide education and assistance to Jews wherever they may be, so that everybody can receive proper Jewish burial.
Beautiful. And as we know, this is called Chesed Shel Emes. Anyone involved in helping a person be buried is the greatest kind of kindness and the greatest kind of mitzvah that we have in Judaism. It's called the truest kindness because human condition is when I do a kindness for someone, in the back of my mind, they say, I help you, you help me. But when you help someone who passed away with a Jewish and kosher burial, you expect nothing in return. It's the purest kind of kindness. Now, Yael, you were a nurse and you left your profession to join the Chevra Kadisha full time?
No, I've been a nurse for over 20 years, and I have done and continue to do a lot of volunteer work for the Chevra Kadisha. I just recently actually left nursing to get involved in Last Kindness, which is an effort on a national level to educate Jews about this area.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for the work you do. And I'm sure that this program and the many programs you're going to be involved in, we're going to educate and share important lessons. We're ready to jump into some of the topics. The topic of death and afterlife is not an easy topic. It's not something that people want to hear about, most people, and not something people want to talk about. And it's better not to think about it as for many and just push it under the rug. But it's an important topic. And that's why we're going to talk about it today, especially because Judaism has so much to share and so much to say about this. But since it's such a heavy topic, we can't go into it, without a joke to sort of soften the blows. And all the information. So the story is told about a rabbi, of course, a Frenchman and an Italian who were sentenced to death by the gallows. And they were each given a final meal, a final wish. They asked the Frenchman, what do you want? The Frenchman says, I would like a bottle of fine, expensive wine. They gave it to him and they hung him on the gallows. And then they asked the Italian, what do you want? And he said, I want a certain pasta, I don't know, penne alla vodka or something. And they gave him that final meal. He ate it and they hung him. They say, Rabbi, what do you want? And the rabbi says, I would like a nice bowl of strawberries, please. And they said, okay. They came back 10 minutes later. They said, sorry, Rabbi, the strawberries are out of season. It'll take 6 months to get strawberries. And the rabbi says, that's okay, I'll wait. So when it comes to the topics of afterlife and death and Judaism, many of us have the same attitude. That's all right, I'll wait. But the truth is, it's an important thing not to wait, but to talk about. And in fact, the sages say that when we plan, for afterlife, it's actually not a bad thing, but it's a good thing. It's a good omen for us. I'm not sure exactly why. And they say you should buy life insurance, you should have a will and all these things. It's not a bad luck, it's a good luck for us. Perhaps it's because the Satan or the Satan likes to, bother people. He could get maximum impact for tragedy. And if you're well prepared, there's not as much tragedy there. But anyway, so this is important. Now, when it comes to afterlife, many societies handle it in different ways. In fact, some societies in ancient times were obsessed when it came to afterlife. They focused on it tremendously. Like, for example, the Egyptians, they built pyramids and they had a book of the dead, and they had boats and food that they would put with the dead person to send them off to the next world. There's religions that talk heavily about heaven and hell. And of course, those concepts do exist in Judaism, but it's interesting. In Judaism, we're not very preoccupied with the discussion of death in the Jewish religion at all. And in fact, it's a religion that's very much life-focused and not death-focused. And one of the great examples is the Kaddish, the prayer of the dead. If you ever read the English, it's fascinating. It doesn't talk about death at all in Kaddish. It talks about the greatness of God. So the prayer about death doesn't even talk about death. So it's interesting, in the Jewish religion, it's really a focus on life, how we should live, why do we live, what are we here for, how do we do mitzvahs? That is the focus. But death is important, and Judaism does have a lot to say about it. And that's some of the ideas we're going to share today. And the main idea that I'll introduce the evening with is the concept of a soul. We know that a person has both a body and a soul. The body would be, I guess, the hardware, and the soul would be the software. When God was creating Adam, well, it says that God created a form of Adam and Eve, actually, out of the earth, the clay, and he breathes into him, Nishmas Chaim, a living soul. And after a long and healthy life, please God, until 120, as we say in Jewish, the two part. And the soul goes back to its source because God breathed the soul into Adam. So that goes back up to God. And the body is meant to go back to its source, the earth. And in fact, God tells Adam, after the sin of the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, God says to Adam, from dust you came and from dust you shall return. And that's why in Judaism, we have the importance of being buried in the earth as it's outlined in the Torah. The Zohar speaks about this a little bit. The Zohar says that as the body returns to its source, the soul goes on its journey to God. So apparently it's not like a person passes away and they end up in heaven or whatever that means, wherever that is. It's a gradual process. It's a process over 7 days of Shiva and 30 days of mourning, and then 11 months of Kaddish. And as this body returns to its source, the soul is released. And interfering with that, the Zohar says, could be painful and difficult for the soul on its journey. Definitely cremation is a big problem in Judaism, causing a lot of pain to the soul. And before we talk about cremation, I know there may be people that cremated family members, and I don't want to be insensitive. So please forgive me if anything that we're going to share is very close to home, very personal. It's not my intention to hurt anyone, but we are going to learn what Judaism has to say about these different topics. And Yael is actually going to guide us step by step in what are some of the important decisions that need to be made. The traditions that we have after a person passes away very much reflect the focus is now on the soul and not on the body anymore. For example, in Judaism, we don't do open casket viewings, we don't do embalming, we don't put a suit on the person. And the reason is the focus is not the body anymore. Now the focus is the soul. When I get a very fancy casket made out of gold or silver or whatever you want, whatever that is, the problem is I'm saying the focus is still the body, and the soul wants to be recognized for what it is at that point, and that is a neshama, a spirit, an energy, and we make that distinction. It's also one of the reasons why in a Jewish cemetery there's a tradition, and someone asked this because I asked some of the followers to ask questions, so I'm going to cover some of that, and I'm sure that Jason and Yael will cover many of the questions as well. Why do we put a stone on top of the tombstone, the little pebbles? You ever see that in a Jewish cemetery? What's the reason? There are many reasons given, but one of the reasons that's given is a stone is not like a leaf or a flower that lives a season and then dies. The stone's there forever for thousands of years. And the same idea is when I put a flower, I'm thinking about something that comes in seasons, like the body. I'm focusing on the body. But as a Jew, when I put a stone, I'm saying the focus is now on a soul that's still here, still watching us, still present in our lives, still praying for us, still loving us, and is here forever. Like that stone, it's permanent. So many of the traditions in Judaism will reflect this idea to focus on the soul, the belief in the soul. When I dress up the deceased and I get a fancy box and I embalm, not I, a person does it, what we're saying is, I don't believe in the soul, I believe only this is it, what I see here. And that's not the case in the Jewish religion. People were asking a lot of questions about heaven and hell. I don't think we're going to get into that very much in this discussion today. We're going to talk about practical steps people need to take. But yes, in Judaism, there is heaven and there is hell. And the general, just the short answer is ultimately just about everyone ends up in heaven, and hell is not at all, it's not so much a punishment as it is a cleansing process. And that means every soul, after living a physical life, has to detach from the physical realm and ascend to the spiritual realm. And that is a sometimes uncomfortable process. And that's called a cleansing, called Gehenna in Hebrew. So that's a little overview, a little introduction, but at this point, it's my pleasure to introduce Yael, who will give us some practical tips and lessons on and explain the aftercare laws and tradition. Yael, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Raps. Thank you, Rabbi Rapoport. So I'm going to, there's a lot to discuss, and I almost think of tonight as a little bit of a teaser. So if anything you hear you want to learn more about, then let Rabbi Rapoport know, and I'm sure he'd be happy to set up some more, some deeper dives, I would say. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly, but I'm going to start out with a pretty basic fundamental question, which is, who are you? And lots of people, when they answer that question, they kind of think about their profession. So maybe I'm a nurse, maybe you're a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer. And what happens when we no longer do that? So I'm no longer, in the last 8 months now, practicing nursing. So did that change who I was? If you're a retired physician, did that change your work? What about your relationship? So if you think of yourself, you think, who am I? And you think, I'm a spouse, let's say, right? Well, what happens if there's a divorce or someone passes away? Are you fundamentally changed? So lots of those type of things, like what we do for a living, or relationships with other people, or certainly what we look like. Like at some point, I may have had a lot of hair and then I went bald, or I lost a lot of weight, or I gained a lot of weight. Those are really more about identity, and they're not really about who we are at our core. Give me one moment. I don't know why I can't screen share here. I mean, I'm screen sharing. There we go. Okay, so as Rabbi Rapoport discussed, who we are is really, in the Jewish perspective, we are a neshama. We are our soul. And we have a body. So what is the soul, right? It's not like I have a brain and I have a set of lungs and I have a stomach and I have a soul. All those other parts of us are physical parts. The soul is spiritual in nature. The soul is the essence of who each of us are. The soul is our consciousness. It's our knowledge. It's our decisions. It's our emotions. And the soul, as actually Hasidic thought tells us, comes from the divine. In Hasidus, they say that each of us is right? We're each a piece of, because it's not physical, it's spiritual. And so essence of who that goes on forever, even after. But in this world, because physical world, the soul can't manifest itself alone, and that partner is. And so in this world, the soul, which is spiritual in nature and eternal because it's spiritual in nature, and the body, which is physical in nature, are completely intertwined. We need them. So for instance, if I want to greet someone and lift up their spirits, or I want to offer words of comfort, then I need a mouth. I need a physical mouth in order to manifest that. Or if I want to write a check out to charity or help someone with their groceries, then that desire needs physical hands in order to be able to manifest that. And so from a Judaic perspective, a Torah perspective, the Jewish perspective is that we are made up, our essence is our soul. It requires a body. They're two totally different entities, but in this world, they're completely intertwined. And so if we come back to that first question of who are you? I like to quote from Noah Weinberg. He's a rabbi who passed away, and he says, who are you? You are a soul. That's who you are, and you have a body. So with that understanding, we can now understand the Jewish perspective of what happens when we die. And again, this is just going to be scraping the surface, but we need to do this in order to understand how Judaism treats the deceased and to understand the laws and customs surrounding it. So when we die, the real us, which we just defined and explained as our soul, it continues on. As Rabbi Rapoport quoted from Bereshit, from Genesis, we each return to our source. The soul and the body, which were so intertwined in this world upon death, they separate from each other. And the soul is trying to move forward into a spiritual world, while the body is to return to the earth. That process, again, Rabbi Rapoport mentioned, is not necessarily so easy. It's not like me just taking, two pens that are stuck together and separating them. The soul and the body have been intertwined for hopefully many, many decades. They were very, very close partners, the most intimate of partners. And so upon death, it takes time for them to separate. What's fascinating is Judaism tells us that when death occurs, the soul, which is us, when I say the soul, again, it's not something else. It's who you are. It's who that person was. Upon death, the person, the soul, has tremendous clarity. More clarity after death about the truths of the world and what is happening than actually in life. That's what the Torah tells us, and we don't really need anything else to support that, but it's interesting. If anybody has read through about near-death experiences, which at this point have been quite well documented in the scientific literature, they completely line up. Universally, people talk about when they were clinically dead, being aware, very aware of what was going around them. So for instance, if somebody was clinically dead and had a near-death experience in the operating room, they could tell you what the doctors and nurses were discussing, what they looked like. And Judaism tells us that right after death, the person who passed away has complete clarity about what's happening. Not only that, because they, pardon my pen, but because the soul and the body were so intertwined in this world, the soul is very, very concerned about its body and how the needs of the body and how it's treated. With all of that framework established, we can now understand the three, and this is just my construct, but three basic fundamental underpinnings of all Jewish burial laws and tradition. The first one is respect. It's respect for the body. The essence of a person is their soul, but that soul couldn't manifest anything in this world without its partner, the body. And so therefore the body becomes important. The body deserves respect because it houses a spiritual soul. And so everything we do to the body needs to be done with the utmost respect. Sensitivity. It's sensitivity to the soul's experience. So if someone passes away, we recognize everyone who's handling that body, that the person who passed away, their essence is right there watching, aware, and concerned with how we treat its partner body. And so everything that we do in Judaism regarding how we care for the deceased is done with the utmost sensitivity to the deceased, the soul's experience. And the third principle is that we try to hasten the body's return to the earth. So some of you may be familiar with how Jews try to bury as quickly as possible. Of course, there are always extenuating circumstances, but as a general rule, we try to bury as soon as we can. Why is that? Well, the soul wants to move forward. It wants to move on, but it's concerned about its body. And it can only move fully on once its body is taken care of. And so again, insensitivity to the soul's experience. And then again, when I say the soul, I mean the person who passed away. They are their soul. Insensitivity to their experience. We do everything we can to hasten the body's return to the earth. Let's go through some of, and again, we're just scratching the surface here, but some of the basic Jewish practices around how we treat the deceased. The first one is a term called Shmira. That's the Hebrew, and it just means the body is guarded. So once the soul and body start to separate from each other, the body and the terms that like the holy books use is that we don't want the body to be treated like a discarded vessel. And so it's just a tradition, a very strong custom. It's not Jewish law, but we try to have from the time of death until burial that there was always somebody near the body. It doesn't have to be in the same room. It could be in the same building. Traditionally, they'll say psalms or prayers to bring comfort to the deceased, but it's a sign of respect and it's a sign of sensitivity, an act of sensitivity. Tahara, purification. So I'm again just gonna take just about 1 minute here. Tahara is actually the core service of what a Chevra Kadisha, a sacred burial society, provides. It's both a physical cleansing of the body, and there's also a spiritual cleansing of sorts. So just to briefly describe it, the physical cleansing part, I'll tell you that it's interesting. Although I'm involved in this, I actually I spent the beginning of my nursing career actually working as a labor and delivery nurse. And very, very interestingly, the same way we take care of a new body when it comes into this world is very similar to how members of the Chevra Kadisha take care of, so hopefully it's an older person as they transition on, and that we gently wash the body, we dry the body, we clean the body. We're trying to actually get the body as close to how it came into the world as when it's going to leave. So everything external would be removed, no makeup, no nail polish, no jewelry. And then the spiritual part, there's lots of prayers. If there is a mikvah, which is a body of water that is involved with times of transition like conversion or other instances, if a mikvah is available, we use a mikvah and put the body in there. If not, there's another process that we can use. Let me talk about shrouds for a moment. So in the Chevra Kadisha, after we do the tahara, we dress the deceased in shrouds, and traditional shrouds are all the same. They may be a little bit different from one city to the other, but they're typically made all of white linen. It's an equalizer. So it doesn't matter if you were the pauper of the town or the supporter, everybody gets the exact same shrouds. Interestingly, there are no pockets, because as a symbol that we don't need to take any material possessions with us. They're not useful in the next world, and it's not what's important. And they're also completely biodegradable. So again, if we're trying to hasten the body's return to the earth, there's no metal, there's no plastic. One other interesting thing to note about shrouds, or what's called techrichim, is that they mimic the clothing that the high priest, known as the Kohen Gadol, would wear on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. When we pass away, there is an accounting of sorts. And I don't mean to say that in a scary way, but we have clarity, like I mentioned before, and we see everything that we did with our life, the choices that we made. I'll get to it soon, but burial itself actually is an opportunity for atonement. And so when we dress the deceased in these pure white linen shrouds that are similar to the high priest, we're preparing them for their Yom Kippur that they will experience. The casket. So a traditional casket, this is actually not a very accurate picture. I'm not sure what wood that is, but a traditional casket, or what we call an aron in Hebrew, should be what they call the plain pine box. Again, we are trying to return the body to the earth as quickly as possible. We want the body to decompose. That's a kindness to the person who passed away. And so we don't want anything artificial in there that would possibly slow it down. No shellac, no liners. It's not needed. The material, the physical is not important at this point. It's a focus inward on what the person did, on the choices, and all the goodness that that soul was manifest. I'll tell you, interestingly, that in Israel, in most places in Israel, certainly in Jerusalem, when we bury someone, we actually don't bury them in a casket at all. The body is prepared, dressed in shrouds, and then wrapped in a tallis, a prayer shawl, and put directly into the ground. The Hebrew here says kura b'karka. In English, it's burial in the earth. This, out of everything that I'm going to talk about, is fundamentally the most important point. This is the mitzvah of chesed shel emes, meaning that this is the greatest act of kindness that you can do for another person, as Rabbi Rapoport said, because there's no expectation of reciprocity. Burial in the earth. Earth is someplace that we plant, we grow for the future, we rejuvenate and give back to the earth. I'll get into cremation a little bit later, but this is the most fundamental mitzvah, the most important point, that anyone who passed away is gently and respectfully buried in the ground.
Thank you, Yael. We have a couple questions that came in, but I just wanted to comment on this idea of being like a Yom Kippur, dressed in shrouds. There are several reasons given for why there is earth from Israel many times put into the grave when someone passes away. It's connected to Chias HaMesim, but one of the reasons that's given is we know that Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is a place where there's more holiness and more forgiveness, and this helps the soul go through its forgiveness from its life and what it did. So it's one of the reasons we put dirt from Eretz Yisrael. Just commenting on what you shared, but beautiful presentation. Thank you very much. I have a question here from someone that maybe Jason can answer. Is it only Jewish people that wash the body? Is that a strictly Jewish thing, or do other religions or other groups do that as well, Jason?
Yeah, each religion is different. The one actually that is most closest to Judaism is Islam. They actually come in and wash and dress very similar to us in a shroud. Obviously overseas, they do the same thing, no casket, but obviously here, in the States where there's regulations, there is a casket. Everything traditional wise is the same.
Very interesting. I've been doing a couple of videos recently about Jewish burial laws, and I saw many of the comments were from Muslims who were saying, oh, we do that too, and we do that too. So it's interesting that you say that. Very nice. People have questions about how to prepare, Jason. So maybe you have some tips. Is preparing for the end, a good idea, a bad idea? What could you shed on, what light can you shed onto this topic?
Yeah, I appreciate you and Yael asking me to talk on this tonight. I'm going to share my screen, and I encourage, while I get that ready, if people don't have pen and paper, or if you want to open your phones, whatever is easiest, there's going to be information that I think will be very valuable to everybody on this. So,
Jason, can I say a joke first?
sure.
I don't want it to get too serious. It's getting very serious over here. We're talking about death, So I'm going to make up a name. Mrs. Stinkovitz is ready to talk finally about her husband's passing. It was very emotional. She decides it's time to open up and speak to her friends and share her feelings. She says, my husband, Mr. Stinkovitz, oh, he was such a tzaddik before he passed away. He didn't want me to stress at all. On the desk, I found 3 envelopes filled with cash. And the friends of Mr. Stinkovitz says, and what was in the envelopes? Well, the first envelope had $10,000, and it says, get a beautiful coffin. Oh, did I get a beautiful coffin? And what was in the other box, the other envelope? The other envelope had $20,000, and it says, hire a caterer for the best smorgasbord, the best shiva you've ever seen. And let me tell you, it was a shiva to die for. It was unbelievable. It was delicious. It was, okay. And what was in the last envelope? The last envelope, it said, my dear wife, here's $100,000. Make sure to get a beautiful stone. She wipes away a tear from the corner of her eyes. She picks up her finger, showing the huge ring. And she says, you like it? Okay. Now back to our program.
You got to put a little humor in it, right? So, being a Jewish funeral director, I'm very educated and continue to educate myself on Jewish funeral customs. But Rabbi and Yael had asked me to deal from the funeral director point of view and the regulations about how you can make your wishes to your family or friend or anyone else. So, how do you pre-plan? Well, basically, pre-planning is talking about your wishes. You want to make sure you write them down and discuss them with your family members. I recommend considering your wishes as well as those loved ones you're leaving behind. And the important thing with discussing them with your family members is also making sure they understand what you're going to do with pre-planning as well as prepaying. And I'm going to explain the difference between those in a minute. I use the example of many years ago, I had made arrangements with somebody who was a widower, and all she asked me was to make sure that she is buried next to her husband. Holocaust survivor, shared her story with me. And I had, kept in touch with her, and she had gone from institution to institution. And unfortunately, when she passed away, she didn't share her wishes with her daughter. And, never got the phone call. It came to me many, many months later that, this person passed away. And I said, what happened? I promised this woman I was going to bury her next to her husband, did some research, found out, that the family landed up cremating her because they didn't know her wishes. She didn't know she had pre-planned. She didn't know she had prepaid. So the biggest thing when you are pre-planning is make sure you discuss that with your family members. Now, when you're pre-planning, I have down here on my slide for those who are on Zoom, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. What does that mean? It means that you can discuss your wishes in stages. You can discuss them with your family. Then you can discuss them with the funeral director. You can think them over. This all does not need to be done in such an immediate amount of time. And along with your wishes, you want to keep them in a safe place. And I bolded on our slide, do not put them in a will or a safety deposit box. The reason with a will is because it is probated after the funeral service. So the will really means nothing. Even if somebody shows it to you, it doesn't officially become a legal document until after it is put through probate. And a safety deposit box, if nobody else in your family has access to that, and you go to the bank and say, oh, my loved one passed away, I need to access their safety deposit box, they're not going to allow you access into that until you provide a will that's been probated or a death certificate if there's no will. So here's the two terms that are always thrown around: pre-planning and prepaying. Pre-planning, like I've just said before, is discussing your final wishes with your family. And it could also entail meeting with a funeral director who's going to gather important information about you that the state requires and walk you through the steps and help you with selecting services. Also, funeral directors and funeral homes can also keep your information in a safe and protected place, as well as providing that information to you. When you go to the prepaying side, it's everything that is listed on the left side with pre-planning, but it also is paying your services in advance with a trust account, life insurance policy, or a bank account marked for funeral services. And just talking about my firm, JS Goldstein Funeral Home, we work out an arrangement with each family, and upon our agreement, all the funeral home's costs are guaranteed. I want you to make note that each funeral home has their own policy, so you have to discuss that with your funeral home, whether you're in New Jersey now, New York. I know we have many different people from all over the country. So the biggest advantage of prepaying is guaranteed pricing, okay? If you are going to prepay, you want to ask and understand all aspects about that before signing. Is it going to, the funeral home's cost going to go up? What happens if they go up? So basically, you want to make sure that you understand all aspects of your arrangement before signing. The other thing is, can your agreement be paid out over time? Each funeral home is different. And then the third question I have down here is, are there finance charges? In the state of New Jersey, there are no finance charges to prepay. That is illegal. This is an important slide, again, because I know we have many people that are from out of state. I've listed Florida because I know we have a lot of snowbirds in New Jersey about prepaying with Florida. And the big thing with Florida is, let's just say you live in Florida, you pre-plan and prepay down there, and you decide, you know what, I'm coming home to New Jersey and I want to move my arrangements. If you want to revoke or transfer that, your Florida funeral home is only obligated to return the money that you put in to your account. So if you put $1,000 in, that's all they're obligated to return to you. They can keep the interest that bears on that account. In the state of Pennsylvania, accounts are all irrevocable, and the funeral home can keep any overages of the funds when the arrangement is billed to the trust account. Also, if you transfer your arrangement from one funeral home to the other, the funeral home can actually keep the interest on that account. Again, very similar to Florida, where they will only return what you put in. I like New Jersey, not because I'm licensed there. I'm licensed in 3 states, but New Jersey to me is the most consumer-friendly state for pre-planning and prepaying. With your revocable account in New Jersey, any overage of your account, so if you put in $1,000 and your service was only $800, the funeral home is required by law to return that excess funding to you or your family's estate. And funeral homes also cannot charge any fee for any discussion of pre-planning at all. Each state, like I said, has their own regulations, and just consult with that when you're looking to pre-plan and prepay. So in the state of New Jersey, there's only 2 agreements that are allowed by the state: revocable agreements. Revocable agreements are 100% refunded upon demand, all the principal you put in and all the interest to the family. You can change your funeral home and funeral service at any time without any penalty. Irrevocable accounts are more for people that are going to look to apply for Medicaid benefits. They are not refundable. They are only payable to the funeral home upon death. And like I've noted here below, they cannot be canceled or refunded. They can be transferred or moved from funeral home to funeral home. So a couple of advice. I know I'm just scratching the surface a little bit. If you prepay, you want to make sure, again, that your funeral home offers guaranteed pricing. You want to know who receives the interest on the account. Most funeral homes will accept it, will take the interest on the account that's not refunded back to the family. A question that's been asked to me many times over the years is, what if a funeral home closes? In the state of New Jersey, your funeral trust account is yours. So if a funeral home closes, your account can move to any funeral home that you wanted to in the state of New Jersey. It is your account. Just because the funeral home closes doesn't mean that you lose out on anything. I know there's many stories that you hear all over the country about funeral homes closing and people losing money. In the state of New Jersey, your money is governed by the state of New Jersey and the New Jersey State Funeral Directors Association, and it is FDIC insured. So you have to look at it as almost like a savings account for your funeral expenses. You're just earmarking it for that and making sure it's protected. And another question I get a lot is, what if I want to move or switch funeral homes? So if I made arrangements with funeral home A, I'm moving out of the area, or I like another funeral home in my area, am I allowed to move my arrangements? And the answer to that is yes. There's a statute that I've listed here that basically says once you contact your new funeral home and work out the documentation with them, the account is transferred to the new funeral home within 10 days of a request. Once again, it's your money and you can move it from wherever you want. Some slide issues here. Oh, here we go. All right. So besides the funeral trust account, there is actually two other ways in the state of New Jersey to prepay your funeral services. A life insurance policy or annuity that's equivalent to the value of the funeral. I always tell families to make sure it's a whole life policy. You see a lot of those term life policies through AARP or New York Life. Once you start paying into them, they actually gain a cash value. So while it might be something that is good in the beginning, as you get older and you might move towards Medicaid, the state of New Jersey will actually make you cash out on that policy. And I've seen that many times where families have put, let's just say $3,000 into an insurance policy, and when they have to cash out on it, they actually lose money on it because the cash value is not the same as the amount that they put in. And then the other one, it's very similar to Choices, which is the New Jersey prepaid funeral trust fund account, is doing your own savings or certificate of deposit that's earmarked for funeral expenses, which can be designated payable upon death to the funeral home at the time. So a couple of key points I'd like everyone to just take away from my part of the presentation today is when making any pre-arrangements with your funeral home or funeral director, make sure to take your time and go over all your available options with them. Just like you would go to a doctor if you had an important appointment, you want to take somebody along to listen, to have a second or third set of ears, take a trusted family member or a friend with you when making arrangements. So that way, when you leave, you both can discuss and make sure you heard the same thing and understand what's going on. And most importantly, make sure you get everything, put it in writing and get copies from your funeral director and provide them to your family. Once again, don't put them in a will or don't put them in a safety deposit box, as those things are basically either read or can only get access after after the will is probated. So I have my information up here. I encourage you to write it down. You can call me in the office. I put my personal cell phone as well as email if you have any questions. I know, once again, like we keep saying, we're scratching the surface. So I'd be more than happy to answer anybody's questions if they have anything that they need explained further or would like more information.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. This is invaluable information, and unfortunately, most people don't have to actually think about it or deal with it until it's too late. And then it's not a good time to get educated, is it?
No, and the one thing that people, I'm sorry, I mean, it's all good, but the one thing families always say to me, you know, when I work with them, what we call at need, after their loved one is as pre-need or prepaid, as we call it, is they always say it was very easy that, you know, mom or dad took care of this, we knew about it, and we just made one phone call, and you kind of just put everything in motion. You took a lot of stress off of our plate with that.
Right. It's so important. Again, not a fun topic, not something we want to, you know, spend time on, but you know, when we do down the line, things become a lot easier. Now we have a couple questions that we'll get to, and we also have the big question, talk about cremation in Judaism. And before we do that, just Yael, did you have any thoughts about the importance of making plans and letting family members know about the plans, especially religious plans?
I mean, I would certainly echo the sentiment that making the decision ahead of time is a kindness to yourself, because people feel better knowing that they've made a decision and they've let kind of like the decision makers in their life know. And it's a kindness to whoever you're leaving behind. So if you have, whether it's your children, your partner, your siblings, a close friend, your rabbi, your attorney, that is key. It's thinking about it ahead of time. People always make better decisions when it's not rushed, and then when it's not like an emotional time. You want to think about this in a clear-headed way. It's kind of shifting the culture, but like I would ultimately like to see, just like the people talk about what their retirement plans or their vacation plans, like we're all going to die. And I actually, it's not for now, but like if you understand how Judaism really sees death, it's not a depressing topic. It actually can really inform and enrich how you live life. But aside from being born, there is no other more universal experience than dying. Some of us will get married, some of us won't. Some of us will be parents, some of us won't. Some of us will have successful businesses, some of us won't. But we're all born and we're all going to die. And not thinking about it doesn't make it easier. So think about it when it's not time sensitive. Do your research in terms of like how you want to be treated. Put it in writing and make sure that the right people know about it. And in terms of the religious, anything that you feel like you want, make that clear. Every funeral home that you go to is not necessarily going to tell you, like, may not tell you like, oh, like about Tahara or about the casket or I mean, this is not speaking to Goldstein, but anywhere in the country, sometimes it is a business and you might feel like you're being like upsold. Like be as specific as you can, but what's important to you, and put it in writing.
I always say be an educated consumer. I won't let anyone sign anything, pre-need or at need, unless they fully understand everything. I always ask them, would you like me to go over it again? There's no rush, when with this sensitive topic.
That's right. And Yael, don't you have a document you're working on? Is that ready yet?
Yeah.
Maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So under this project that I'm involved with called Last Kindness, we're developing a document. It's called My Burial Wishes Document, and it's a document that's actually legally binding. It's outside of the will. As Jason said, a will is to go through something called probate. This document is not tied to any money. This has nothing to do with inheritance or estates. It's simply a document where you can express your wishes, and those have legal weight in court. Now, not everyone needs that. Everybody does, though, need to put their wishes in writing. So if you want, you can and you can check out a website for the local Chevra Kadisha. It's called choosejewishburial.org. I'll say that again, choosejewishburial.org. Up there is a form. We're actually like tweaking it a little bit, and it does require witnesses. We're working on coming up with sort of a lighter form. Like even if you just wrote a paper, that said like, dear whoever, you name your children or your sibling, this is what I want, and you sign it. Even that would be significant. Most of the time, we're not concerned about it ending up in court. That's a little bit more when there's tension in families. Most of the time, right, if you have a pretty functional situation, people will respect your wishes, but only if you're very explicit about what your wishes are. But you can definitely go to choosejewishburial.org. If you have questions for me, again, touch me there, and you will see that legal document if you at least want to put your eyes on it.
There's also in the state of New Jersey, while it's been around a little bit, it is becoming more, popular is not the word, but more instrumental with helping people with burial wishes, which is a funeral agent. That you can appoint a funeral agent. That is it could be a family member, it could be a friend, and that is a person who will handle your funeral arrangements. Just that, doesn't have nothing to do with the will. We've seen a lot of it in the state of New Jersey in an increase, since COVID. So that supersedes everything right now, funeral agent, if you want to Google that term.
Right. I want to get to the topic of cremation and Judaism. Unfortunately, it seems to be it's very problematic in the Jewish religion, cremation. In the Torah, we constantly read all the stories. In this one, Abraham is buried, Isaac is buried, everyone is buried. We don't see cremation in the Torah. In fact, it's something that's forbidden and harmful in the Jewish religion, and yet it is so popular. I believe the numbers are 40% in the United States are higher than that. And then I read that Jewish people, 30% in the United States, cremation. Is it higher? Don't even tell me that, Yael. I don't want to know that, but now I know. It's shocking. And I think it's simply because, people are good. People want to do the right thing. I think a lot of people are uninformed, and there's a few, preconceived notions, like maybe it's better for the planet or less, and that it probably is a little less expensive, but not necessarily. There's reasons why people make these decisions. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about. In fact, and this is a joke, so don't get too serious. A woman once came to her rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I decided to be cremated and I want my ashes spread around the shopping mall." And the rabbi says, "Don't you know, cremation, Judaism, this is a harsh decision that you're making. Why do you want this?" She says, "Well, if I put my ashes in the shopping mall, I know my daughters will visit me at least once a week." It's not a good joke right now because no one goes to shopping malls anymore. We order everything online. So you see, don't get cremated. But anyway, Yael, I'll turn the camera over to you. Maybe share some points about Judaism and cremation for us.
Sure. Rabbi Rapoport, let me just ask you, I want to be sensitive to the time, just so I know how to frame what I'm going to share. Tell me how long you want to give me.
No one ever does this for me. It's a lot of pressure. I don't know. I think maybe 7-10 minutes sound good, or it's not enough?
So we're going to go over a bit. Okay, sure. So I want to preface it before diving into this, that like Rabbi Rapoport said at the beginning, I want to be sensitive that everybody who's listening and joining us tonight has their own history. And so the perspective that I'm going to share is classic Jewish perspective. Some of it is just scientific fact, but we all, when we make decisions in life, make the decisions with the best knowledge that we have at the moment. And so if anyone listening tonight has somebody in their life close to them who has been cremated, or you involved in that cremation, then just really see this as a, so we can only take responsibility for doing the best that we can with the tools and the knowledge that we have. And so the information that I'm sharing is to enlighten you, to give you things to think about when you're thinking about how you want to be treated, God willing. And as we say, I may have Esther, I'm going to have a very, very long, healthy life. But cremation is extremely prevalent right now. And the numbers actually are that close to 50% of Jews in America today are being cremated. I live in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. The numbers are a little bit lower here. If you go to the West Coast, they're probably closer to 70%. If you go to the Bible Belt, they're significantly lower. And so there is some disparity across geography, but it's very, very high. I just want to speak for about like maybe 1 or 2 moments about why people are choosing cremation, some of the most common reasons, and then we'll talk about the sort of the Torah perspective and why it's so problematic. Why are people choosing cremation? I think the #1 reason is that we just do what people around us do. It's a culturation. And so it's not that it's a particularly growing Jewish trend, it's just a particularly growing American trend. And most Jews, most are not particularly educated in a deep way about Judaism. I mean, they may know about matzo balls and menorahs, but they don't necessarily know about how Judaism talks about how we treat the deceased. And if that's what everyone around me is doing, well, that's probably what I'll do too. I think that's actually the #1 reason why people are choosing cremation. And I think the second and third reasons, which will sort of counter, I'm going to try to counteract, and I would say give you a counter perspective, is that people, it's easier and simpler. And we live in a culture where I know I hardly go grocery shopping, right? I get my groceries delivered at the door. and I'll even pay a little bit more to buy something on Amazon than running out the store. We expect things to be easy and convenient. And cremation doesn't have to be easier and convenient or even cheaper, but it often is. And so if I could just make one phone call and they'll come pick up the body and wipe my hands, and that's just easier. And people tend to do that. Part of Last Kindness, this project with Malda, is actually really to help people so that things like all the details shouldn't be a barrier. But the other point that I'd like to share is that if we value something, then we put in effort. And so if I value, let's say, having a doctor's appointment, I'm going to go and travel to my doctor as opposed to just having a conversation on the phone, right? So if I value education, then I may pay for a better school for my child. So if we attribute value to something, then not only will we maybe pay more for it, but we'll also put more effort in. Okay, let me share some, and I'm going to try to go really, really briefly through the slides. And they're really just visual. Oh. This is what happened before. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to do a little comparison, and I'm going to go super fast, but burial is a mitzvah. I mean, it's an explicit mitzvah in the Torah. Burial is gentle and respectful. We bury things that we love and consider holy. So you'll see there a picture of a Torah scroll. So a Torah scroll is probably the most holy physical object in the Jewish world. But just like all physical things, Torah scrolls also have expiration dates. And when they're no longer can be used because of the ink or the lettering or the parchment's cracked, we don't toss them into the trash can. We don't burn them, right? That's what our enemies did to us. We bury them. We burn trash. We bury things that we love. In contrast, cremation, and I think there's a lot of cognitive disconnection that takes place. I'll tell you that before I got involved in this topic, when I thought about cremation, I just sort of thought about movies that I had seen where ashes are spread over the Pacific Ocean and there's beautiful music in the background and there's something that just how feels natural, gentle about it. Spend 5 minutes on Google and type in what actually happens during cremation. I'm not going to get into the details because of the time, and I don't really want to come across as exploitive, but just check it out for yourself. It uses machinery. The body is melting. It's very high temperatures. It is violent. Fire is a tool of destruction. Earth is a tool of care, of replenishing and create and planting for the future. Okay, again, let's talk about this natural, more eco-friendly choice. And again, I think this is just something that the marketing machines of the cremation industry, which is a very, very powerful industry, like a multi-billion-dollar industry.
You know, before you go to the next topic, Yael, just quickly, I want to jump in. I was reading that during cremation, normally there's a skeleton that's put through a blender afterwards. Jason, you're in the business. Is that true?
No, that is not true.
No? Okay.
No, basically the remains are placed into what's called a retorted machine, and that creates the cremation. And then at the end, they basically kind of, without going graphic, they do grind whatever's left together to place it into what's called a temporary urn for families.
I don't know. I just heard you say they put the body in the blender. But anyway, go along.
I'm going to jump in because I think it's important for people to not gloss it over. What happens during cremation, and again, I'm not going to get into details, the body's put into an oven. Everything that can melt, melts. What's left is bone because bone doesn't melt. And so what's left is charred bone. The bone is then removed from that first machine and it's put into a second machine, which grinds it down. So you can call it whatever its term is, but there are two machines used. The first one burns, the second one grinds. And what gets put into the urn is the remains of it, are those remains. There's no DNA in ashes. There's absolutely no living connection between ashes and the person that was. So like I said, there's no DNA. There's no way to associate any particular ashes with any person or any other living creature. There's absolutely no organic connection from one to the other. It would be more of a connection to take the lock of someone's hair and put that in a frame or an urn, and that would be more, and which is totally fine according to Jewish law to do. That would be a stronger connection between the person who passed away and what's remaining and the ashes of the cremation process. There's no connection.
Well, the purpose, I just wanted to bring out the point you were saying, that it's not a gentle process as it's perceived, the sprinkling over the ocean or whatnot. There's the part no one really sees.
It's not clean, and it's not quick, and it's not gentle.
Yeah, I see you were going to talk about eco-friendly, and I jumped in. So
yeah, okay. So I'm glad you brought that up. So the eco-friendly. So again, I think there's a lot of association, again, probably just from the marketing materials, that somehow this is eco-friendly. So real environmentalists, true environmentalists, promote what they call green burial. Green burial. Green burial is returning the body to the earth without anything synthetic. That sounds like Jewish burial. Every aspect of traditional Jewish burial has everything is completely biodegradable. If you look around at the natural world around you, what's happening to the plants in your backyard, or to the animals in the wild, or that when they end, because nothing physical lasts, right? Then they are returned to the earth. They decompose and they replenish the earth. So, like they say, pushing up the daisies. Well, there's a reason that daisies would be able to grow where a person once was. It's because the earth has been replenished. In contrast, cremation uses machinery. It uses fossil fuels, lots of fossil fuels. And there are toxins that are emitted from the cremation process, including carbon and mercury. Almost all states have limits on how many cremations can take place because they pollute the environment. And I'll just show you recently, of note, California, which is notoriously a very eco-conscious state, and of course has limits on how many cremations a crematoria can do. During the height of COVID, because unfortunately there was such a backlog, they lifted temporarily the limits on cremation, and the air quality in California, particularly around Los Angeles, suffered. Cremation is not an eco-friendly choice. I don't have it on a slide, but another aspect of the eco-friendliness is sometimes as people talk about land use, right? And they'll throw around the phrase, like land is for the living. It's true, burial does take up land. But if there's, I've looked into some of the research. Have you ever flown from New York to LA? Do you know how much open land there is? It would take hundreds of years. Maybe that's not to say. We spend more land each year building just Walmarts in this country than gets used for burial. The research that I did see calculated that if 1%, I'm sorry, I think it was, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of open land in America if every American chose to be buried. And so it's a falsehood to say we're using up all our land. There is a lot of land to be used. And when you bury someone, you're marking a spot. Yes, this person mattered. There's a little spot in the world. It's a sign of respect for the person, and it's a sign of respect for humanity. When we burn things, we destroy them. It's as if they were never here. I think I'm going to actually end there because I don't want to come across, like I would say, do your research. Look, reach out to us, Google, think it through. Don't make such an important decision just because it's easier or that's what people are around you doing. Make a thoughtful, well-researched effort because it's an eternal decision.
Beautiful.
All right.
Eternal, that's right, forever. Very good. We got a couple of questions. As long as our panelists are willing to stick around for a few extra minutes to answer some questions, or does anyone have to go?
Nope.
Okay, so let's see. Thoughts on cremation? We did that. There's a possibility that some people don't go to heaven. We're not going to go into heaven and hell right now. Does Judaism believe in reincarnation? The short answer is yes, but we're not going to go into that right now.
I think you need another class, Rabbi Rapoport.
Yeah, I think there needs to be another class on heaven, hell, reincarnation, all that. That's a whole nother discussion. Someone wanted to know, is there anything particular that is done to the body before it's buried? So you touched on this, Yael, but maybe a little more.
I mean, I can just tell you briefly, like.
What is the preparation process and why, in short?
Yeah, so what the Chevra Kadisha does, just really briefly, they come, first of all, it's done very, very modestly. So there's a women's team and there's a men's team. If the person who passed away is a woman, she's just taken care of by a woman, taking care of her sisters, her Jewish sisters, and the same with a man. There's a men's team who will take care of a man who passes away. It's quiet in the room. There is a conscientiousness that the deceased is present. And so there's no talking at all. You know, I saw a gentleman who had a few comments in the chats who checked out, but he said something like, don't all religions respect the body and wash the body? So I don't have a degree in religions and I really can't speak to other religions, but I'll say that certainly in non-religious areas, not necessarily. And I'll tell you this from my own personal experience. So I'm a nurse. I spent many, I've had in operating rooms many times. And there's a live person on the table, but they're under anesthesia. And people are joking around. They're talking about their weekend plans. They're talking about the game last night. I've unfortunately, through my medical training, had to actually witness an autopsy. There's no cleaning. It's extremely violent. There is no aspect of respect there at all. There is more respect, and I would say holiness, in the room where a tahara is taking place than there is in an operating room with a live person on the table. And so I wouldn't say, don't we give it that everybody respects the body? I don't think that's true. It would be nice, but I don't think it is. In terms of like what actually happens during the tahara, so just very, very briefly, like I said, we're trying to return the body to the way that it came into the world. And so first we remove anything external. So if they're tubes, bandages, and anything like that, we makeup, nail polish, we take it out and then the body is washed. It's washed in the most modest way. So only one part of the body is uncovered at a time, gently. Water, soap, washcloth, just like I did when I was a nurse for newborn babies who were just born like seconds before or minutes before. And then once the body is physically cleaned, then the tahara takes place. Again, if there's an actual mikveh available in the funeral home, the body is immersed in a mikveh. If not, it's washed with continuous water. There are prayers, the only talking that takes place, it's completely silent, except prayers that are said. There are prayers for the deceased. There are prayers for the deceased family. There are prayers for the entire Jewish people.
Which, if I may jump in,
yeah,
Yael, which these prayers actually, on a spiritual level, bring comfort to the soul, which is in a transition and a little bit of an uncomfortable state before being buried. So this is part of the comfort brought to the soul who passed. But go on, sorry for jumping in.
Absolutely. Everything that we're doing is done with respect for the body and sensitivity to the soul's experience. Then the body, after the tahara, the body's wet, so then it's dried, it's dressed in the shroud, it's placed into the casket. There is earth from Israel, because we're in America, that's sprinkled around, and that's pretty much it. I'll just share with you actually my favorite part of the tahara. And it's funny to have a favorite part, but whenever I come back from one, I always feel a little bit uplifted because it's a reminder that one day this will be me too. Now, I hope it won't be for a very, very long time, but it's good to face your own mortality because it informs how I live and to make every day and every choice as meaningful as possible. Because I don't take my car with me and I don't take my house with me or my vacation home or my stock portfolio, right? What I take is the decisions that I made, how I impacted people, the mitzvos that I did, the Torah that I learned. That's all that I take with me. So it's a reminder. But my favorite part is actually the end of the Tahara, the Chevra Kadisha team asks forgiveness from the deceased if we did anything that was even slightly disrespectful. And I love that part because it epitomizes the entire approach that we're taking, that everything we're doing is just to care for the person who passed away. And I don't know them. I've never done a tahara on anyone I know. I'm just a Jewish woman taking care of a Jewish woman in her time of need.
Very nice. I just lost some sound here, some little, didn't hear the last thing. Yael, you made a couple references to a little baby, you know, washing a child, like that gentleness. And there's an interesting saying the sages tell us that when a baby is born into this world, the baby has its hands clenched, but when a person passes away, the hands are open. We come into the world with the idea that we're going to take so much, we're going to get everything, we're going to conquer, we're going to own everything, and then we walk away with everyone with open fists. We don't take anything with us. And there's just like a lot of interesting connections between coming in and going out. They say that when a child is born, the family is smiling and the baby's crying. And then when a child leaves the world, a person leaves the world, the family's crying. But the child is, the person is actually smiling, the soul's with God. But it also reminds me of the story of the person who lost all his money in the stock market, and someone said to him, what's going on? He says, I sleep like a baby. He says, what do you mean? He says, I sleep an hour, I cry an hour. I sleep an hour, I cry an hour. But anyway, full circle. We have some questions here for Jason. They want to know, Seth Coleman, there's a special bank account, POD. How do you word it if you make a bank account for after you pass away?
So that end of it, if it's outside the trust fund with choices, the New Jersey prepaid funeral trust fund, if you're talking about an account that's earmarked, which is found for funeral expenses, that is something that an attorney could help set up, as well as your bank.
Okay. And then what if someone wrote, what's the cost of an average funeral? Is that like, you know, something you could answer on one foot?
Not really, because it all depends upon, you know, the cemetery that you're selecting and their opening charges. Here in the state of New Jersey, or actually, I'm sorry, let me take that back. Here down in our region in New Jersey, because we are so close to the water, 90%, 95% of the cemeteries, whether Jewish or non-Jewish, they require burial vaults to prevent the earth from settling in. So there's a cost to that. Really can't give you a range. I always tell everyone, you know, to let me know what they're thinking about service-wise. You know, for example, graveside versus synagogue versus funeral home, as well as, you know, newspapers, limousines, and then you can get more of a concrete number. To give a ballpark, I mean, I can give you a ballpark.
What happens if someone says, give me your base cost? Can you answer that? Like just base without any, like graveside, basic, or you don't?
I mean, it's still difficult because it determines on the cemetery. Like if somebody called me and says, tell me the cost of a graveside service locally in the cemetery, I could say it could be anywhere from $6,000 all the way up to $10,000. You know, it depends what you need, you know, what you're going. So there's
a good where to start. And I've seen it's a lot more complicated than that. So the bottom line is, people, don't die, stick around, stay healthy, do your exercise, eat your vegetables, study a lot of Torah. It'll make you happier and help you live longer, because, you know, please God, we should all be gesund and well.
Right. Most importantly, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go back. No, I was just going to say, you know, when I talk about services, it's not only what you want, but it's also the service that you're getting from your funeral home. You know, I got to be honest, in 20 years that I've done this, I maybe can count on a couple of fingers how many times a family has ever questioned the cost of a funeral to me, because they felt the value that they were getting from me was priceless, you know.
Right. The way that you're treated, the way that the deceased is treated, you can't, it's
and the living too.
It's not right. And the living, right. You're right. And I've seen firsthand, so Yasher Koch. Okay, Yael, question. Can anyone be involved in a tahara? Do you have to go to school for this? If someone chose to.
No, there's no one going to school. There is a training process. I mean, it depends where you live. I mean, every major Jewish city or area should have a Chevra Kadisha. Sometimes it's connected to a particular synagogue. For like the one that I am, we're just independent. We're not connected to a synagogue. We tend to work in the same funeral home because that's who calls us, but we'll go anywhere. Actually, the president, again, 100% volunteer. Nobody takes a dime for any of this. He told me that he's actually done a Tahara like in a church that they called him. I don't know what the backstory was there, but it was the question about receiving or being on the
I guess the question is if someone says I would like to volunteer, is that a possibility?
Potentially there's a bit of a vetting process. We want to, but potentially yes. I mean, lots of places can definitely use help, especially if it's an all volunteer. The bigger places, I used to live in New York City. I didn't do this there, but like there are so much busier people. I mean, there are people who are on like payroll. They get paid to do this because they're doing, 10 a day. Whereas where the Chevra Kadisha I'm part of, I mean, it's just soccer moms and accountants and nurses, and we get a call and we just go out at night and we just do it. Can I speak to one question though that I saw in the chat earlier, Rabbi Rapoport?
Sure, please, yeah.
Someone said,
I'm not going to get them wrong.
Someone said, does anybody really believe that like what the body is coming back? Okay, so I want to say that it is, and this may sound very bizarre to the listeners here, but there's a fundamental belief in Judaism in this idea of resurrection. Now, resurrection doesn't mean zombies, and the way the media talks about it. But in the classic Amidah prayer, the silent prayer, it's the second blessing. So this is not something hidden away. Those who pray 3 times a day say this 3 times a day. And just because you haven't experienced this yourself doesn't mean that it's not true. So when you look in like the holy books that talk about this, they talk about, let's say, they don't say an alien, but I just want you to imagine that an alien came out, and they watched someone put a little apple seed in the ground. And then someone says to them, an earthling says, what's going to happen to that little seed? Come back in 25 years and there's going to be this big, huge tree. And they say, that doesn't make any sense. That's like almost dead, that little seed. But obviously you and I know that that's true. We put seeds in the ground, we come back 50 years later and there's an oak tree, right? Or we come back 20 years later and there's an apple tree. Judaism does fundamentally believe in some sort of regrowth. Now, this again, a whole topic, and maybe Rabbi Rapoport can do a class on this. It doesn't mean that you're coming back with the same wrinkles and the same limbs. That's not what it means, right? It means something very, very different. But there is a planting process that takes place when someone is buried for the future, for a resurrection of sorts, not what you're thinking. It's not the cartoons, it's not zombies. But yes, there is an idea that the soul lives on forever and that body, a piece of that body, a seed of the body is necessary. You don't have to be sure about this. Just hedge your bets. Burial is always the safer choice. Cremation can never be undone.
It's interesting. We talk about this from a spiritual perspective, Tichias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead, of course, not like the zombie apocalypse, but from our science has already shown how you can take DNA, you could rebuild, you could build from one cell, you could build a living being. So science has already showed us the miracles that can happen. And, there's a lot more that we will see one day. Sages tell us there's one bone in the body that never decomposes. It's called the luz. It's the space of the skull, right back there. The luz does not, and apparently I believe science says that too, that the luz will always stay there. Every other part of the body will, But anyway, there's another question here. What do you call the friend or person who handles the details of your funeral? Okay, that's the first question. So I guess that's to Jason. Is there a term for that person? And then
funeral agent.
Funeral agent, okay, that's the answer, Seth. And then the next part, what is the normal percentage they would receive? That's not a paid position, I assume. That's a friend,
I believe so.
Someone who cares for you, yeah. Okay.
The agent just means that you're assigning this person for this one task. please make sure to take care of my burial and all the, all the arrangements. That's all it means.
Yeah, hopefully you don't have to pay someone. You have a friend or someone that you can trust for that. I'm going to go to the Zoom here. I'm going to unmute all. Wow, if anyone's talking in the background, we will hear you. Okay. Okay, you can unmute yourself at this point if you have a question for any of us. And we'll finish off with one or two more questions. Anyone here would like to ask a question?
Rabbi?
Yes.
First of all, the 11 months is only for parents. If any other spouse is nifta, it's not 11 months, it's only 30 days.
Yes.
That's number one. Number two, Mashiach should come, and we shouldn't need all this.
Amen. Amen. Well said.
There'll be clear summation.
Ani mamin b'emunah shalema. I believe with complete and perfect faith in the coming of the Mashiach every single day. So from your mouth to God's ears. Hope for the best. Believe in the best. Plan for the worst, though. Very good. Anyone else have any questions here?
I don't have a question, but I would like to say that recently we used the Chevra Kadisha, and we never heard of them before. I found out about them from a cemetery in Florida, and the organization is wonderful, and every Jew should know about them. And it's really a shame that more people that don't know about them. And the reason that most people get cremated is because they can't afford to get buried, because the funeral parlors are way too expensive. And Chevra Kadisha can help any Jew to be buried that can't afford it or can barely afford it.
Well,
and,
thank you for
that's all I
sharing
want to
that.
say.
Yes, thank you for sharing a personal experience. I agree with you. I know that we have a Chevra Kadisha in Cherry Hill. There's one in Philly. Here in our city, we don't actually have a Chevra Kadisha, but Jason is always able to bring in the Chevra from Lakewood, which is very helpful as well. And I just want to put it out there. If there's ever a story of a person, for whatever reason, cannot get a Jewish burial, and the money is the issue, reach out to me. There are ways to make things happen. Jason has been has done huge mitzvahs with myself and the community. We made it happen from the funeral end. They helped, and from donors' ends. Please let me know if you ever hear of someone that's going to be cremated. Even if it sounds like a lot of money, reach out to me. And we have successfully buried Jewish people who would have ended up being cremated. In fact, just a few days ago, Jason and I were involved in a funeral that could have been a cremation.
I would also like to put, if I can, to sort of three call to actions, which first is like put your wishes in writing, think about wishes in writing. The other, in terms of like the affordability, again, people in the Jewish community care. Nobody wants to be taken advantage of, right? And looking for a free ride. But if there is somebody who truly cannot afford to be buried, that should never, ever be a barrier. Reach out to your rabbi, reach out to your Chevra Kadisha. I have a relationship, I know in South Florida, a cemetery that will bury for free and has buried for free if needed. I have that same relationship in New York. Again, if it's necessary, and I would say this, that if you have tzedakah money, if you want to help someone be buried, contact a Chevra Kadisha and tell them that you want to donate just for a fund that helps the indigent who are struggling to be buried. That's something that you can support. You can give money to our Chevra Kadisha, you can give money to your rabbi and say, save this earmark it for providing burial for another Jew.
Yes, what a mitzvah. Absolutely.
I know there's an organization that's in charge of this. That people who can't afford it, there's an organization that they bury people.
Yes,
I used to daven with the guy.
We've worked with such an organization called Chesed Shel Emes. There are several organizations, but definitely your local rabbi or your local Chevra or your local funeral home can be very helpful in helping you, guiding you there. So, don't jump to conclusions. I'm taking still another question. Anyone else? Okay. Well,
And spread the word. Like, let's try to shift the culture and have this be something that people talk about and not shy away from. Like I said, it's a universal experience. Everybody thinks about it at some point. They just kind of shove it to the side. So bring this up with your friends. I was listening to a lecture on this. Do you ever think about it? Have you ever thought about what you wanted? Let's just make it something that people talk about.
Rabbi,
yes.
just a comment about Jason. He was very extremely helpful when my mother was preparing for her final passage, and all the information that he has given tonight was exactly the information that we heard when he sat down with Mother and I, and we planned her funeral, and we had a prepaid agreement which produced interest, which helped with some additional costs at the end. So this pre-planning was a good idea. And Jason was very good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Jason.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Mr. Altman.
Very nice. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Jason Goldstein and Yael Davidowitz. Thank you for giving us your time. I'm going to save this. It's going to be recorded on my Facebook, and I can share it with anyone who'd like, as well as we're going to send it out in our weekly email. It's going to also be saved on Instagram as well. So it's a good talk. It's not so long, an hour and a half, not terrible to refer to take notes. And please God, everyone should live a long, happy, healthy, joyous, nachas-filled life with all the blessings. And we shouldn't have to worry about this until 120, when, and we shouldn't have to worry about it at all. Mashiach should come right now. Amen.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
What I'm
Going through now, I'm not ready for you yet, Jason.
That's fine.
I got 30 years yet.
Yes, you do.
Hashem.
Meryl, you're the toughest Jew I know.
That is true. I will back him up on that one.
Yeah. Meryl, you should have a refuah shalema.
Thank you.
You have your name by the Torah. God willing, we're going to make a big kiddush and celebrate.
I'll be there and Molly will be there. Good night, everyone.
Nice
Thank
job.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Bye-bye.
I wish I could have been in from the beginning. I couldn't. This was lovely.
It was terrific. Yeah, it was wonderful.
Really was. My kids should have listened.
They can get it from Avrohom.
Yeah, Avrohom recorded it, so you can go back and watch it.
It's good.
Good night, everyone. Take care.
Good night, Jason.
Hey,
Thanks, Jason. Great. Bye-bye.
Hi, Ed. Good night, Ed.
You know,
Bye. How do you get out of this?
All right. Thank you, everyone. Sei gesund. Leah, it's good to see your name. All right. Take care, everyone. Laila Tov.